If you want to spend a day at the beach alongside wild Mustangs, or drive 500 miles of one of the most famous scenic parkways in North America, or chow down on the greatest barbecue of your entire life, then you need to add North Carolina to your travel bucket list. Today, our native North Carolinian, Lea Rose, tells us all about everything that you need to know before you visit her beautiful home state. Everything from where you need to stay to her favorite things to do between the Appalachian Mountains and the Outer Banks. But before I introduce our guest, pause this episode, like and subscribe to our channel, and leave us a 5-star review. Welcome to the show, Lea Rose Alba.
Hi, thanks for having me, Betty.
Of course.
As Betty said, I'm Lea Rose. I'm Travel Lemmings managing editor, and I'm excited to talk about my home state, North Carolina, today.
So as of right now, your home base is Chicago, but you grew up in North Carolina. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about that experience and why you are our North Carolina expert today.
So as Betty said, I live in Chicago now, but I am originally from North Carolina. I grew up just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. So that's in the western part of the state, like right in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I grew up in a town called Brevard, which is teeny tiny, but very cute and charming, known for white squirrels. Yeah, it's a very cute mountain town. And so I grew up there, and then I went to college in Charlotte, North Carolina. And just growing up, I had a chance to kind of go all around the state. My parents were really big into day trips, so we would always be visiting like tiny towns outside of Brevard and outside of Asheville and going on hikes and doing all the things. And I've also, been over to the east part of the state, which is where the Outer Banks and the beaches are. But I mean, the western part of the state is kind of like more my domain, but it's just a beautiful state, and I'm excited to share more about it today.
Well, it sounds like you have been to every corner of the state. And as someone who was raised a North Carolinian, what are the best things to do in North Carolina?
Ooh, that's a big question, just because the state does have a lot to offer. And it's this probably leads into a later question, but it's kind of broken up into 3 distinct areas that kind of dictate the kind of experience you're going to have. So in the western part of the state is the mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, Appalachia. And then in the middle of the state, it's what we call the Piedmont. So it's much more flat, and that's kind of where some of the cities are. And then you go to the eastern part of the state, which is people think the Outer Banks, the beaches, that type of thing. So as far as some of the best things to do in North Carolina, I would say nature and outdoor attractions are probably one of the biggest things. I'm definitely biased because I grew up in the mountains, but I think just getting out into the forest and going hiking and mountain biking and camping and fly fishing is really big over there. And just enjoying nature is just one of the best things, because it's a really beautiful, but I think underrated part of the country, and just lots of like rolling mountains, lots of nature and animals, wildlife, like all of that. There's just really a lot to explore throughout the year too. Like from spring to fall, it's, a different experience. And even in the winter, it can be a great time to go hiking and experience all that, because the weather is not too cold or anything like that. So it's just a beautiful state nature-wise, and there's a lot to do year-round. And then for some other popular things to do, day trips are a huge one, just because, we've got the main cities kind of around the state, and we'll probably touch on that in a bit. But from the main cities, like let's say Asheville, Charlotte, Raleigh is the capital, there's a lot of cool little towns outside of the bigger cities. And there's a lot of very like charming small towns that I think are just very like classic, like mountain town, or just like classic American small town type of vibe. And there's a lot of charm to be found there. And then food is another big thing. So Carolina barbecue is a must. If you're heading down there, you have to eat some barbecue. There's 2 different types of North Carolina barbecue. There's like Western style and Eastern style. And that basically has to do with like the sauces. So Western style is, I believe, like kind of ketchup based, and it's more of that like smoky, sweet flavor you think of when you think of barbecue sauce. And then Eastern style is like vinegar based, which I like that one because I don't know, I kind of like that flavor palette. But they're very different, and they're both really good. So definitely have some barbecue. Beer is huge, specifically in Asheville. I think it's one of the biggest like beer cities in the US. There's literally like 40 plus breweries in Asheville, which is a lot. Yeah, people are drinking their beer down there. And I have a whole article on breweries in Asheville, but there's just a huge brewery scene. So that's a big thing to do. There's the Biltmore House and Estate in Asheville, which is huge. It's like, I think, the biggest privately owned mansion in America. So there's a lot to do. And I think I kind of touched more on like the western part of the state, but over on the East Coast, beaches, boardwalk, small beach towns, there's wild horses on some of the barrier islands in the Outer Banks. So there's a lot of fun stuff.
Oh my gosh, wild horses. That's so cool. Actually, one of my friends just told me that she went on a trip to North Carolina and she was driving on the beach and there was no one on the beach and all these wild horses were just running alongside her. It's like, that
Yeah.
doesn't even sound like a real experience. It's so
Yeah, so in some of the Outer Banks there are like wild horses. I think they're Mustangs specifically, but they've been there for like generations and they're living out there. They're vibing out there. They're they swim. Yeah, so I don't know, just a
so
very unique
cool.
thing to do. Thing
I
to see.
never would have known that. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, how have I never heard about that? No, and you touched on a whole bunch of different things that we're going to dive a little bit deeper into, and you also mentioned that you have some articles. So, listeners, if you want to check out travellemming.com and type in North Carolina, Lea Rose has so many different guides, not just for Asheville, but different areas around North Carolina, as well as her ones on Chicago and all that. But obviously, focusing on North Carolina today, but you can do a deeper dive into all those. She has some really great information on the website. Again, travellemming.com, North Carolina. Okay, so you just kind of gave us a brief overview of all these amazing things to do. If you had your best friend coming to visit you, what are the top 3 things that you would absolutely have to take them to do for their first visit to North Carolina?
So if I were to bring someone to North Carolina and take them on some of my favorite things to do, that would probably include, number 1, the Blue Ridge Parkway. And I probably should have mentioned this earlier when you had mentioned, like, what are the best things to do? I can't believe I missed that. But the Blue Ridge Parkway is definitely one of the top attractions in the entire state. And I think it's known as like America's favorite drive, but basically it's like a 100s of mile parkway that goes from like roughly Virginia and it like through Western North Carolina and then I think into Tennessee, like around that. And it just goes through the mountains and it's beautiful. Like I just feel like one of the best things to do is to simply just get in the car, like pack a picnic, plan to go on some hikes, like and stop here and there to look at the viewpoints and stuff, but just literally go for a drive and enjoy the mountains. And if you're an early riser and you want to get up in the morning and see sunrise, more power to you. I think that would be really, really beautiful. Unfortunately, I'm just not a morning person, but it is really nice if you go up in the morning. Another thing would probably be to, I don't know, just kind of shop around and enjoy some of like the Appalachian like culture and craftsmanship and traditions. So, and like I said, in the western part of the state, there's a lot of Appalachian influence, just like Southern Appalachian. And I have a whole article I kind of wrote on this. It was a perspective piece, but just kind of how to experience this more like authentic local side of that part of the states. But basically, like there's so many cool places where you can get local pottery, just like local like handicrafts almost, like I don't know, wood spoons and sculptures and things, pottery, textiles. There's like a lot of that type of thing in the western part of the state. And it's really beautiful. And like I have a ton of pottery that I bought from back home and I have here in Chicago that I eat off of every day. And I'm like, it just, I don't know, it reminds me of home. It's one of my favorite things. So I think shopping for that kind of thing is just a great way to kind of appreciate the local culture and history of the area. And along with that, you can go enjoy like local music, like bluegrass and kind of like folk music. There's kind of a fine line with country music. It's not quite country music. It's more like folk bluegrass type of thing, but you know, banjos and those types of instruments. So there's a lot of rich culture, I think, in that part of the state. The third thing I would recommend would be to eat the food and to have some good barbecue and have what I think is typically called like fixins, which are just sides. And that tends to be like mac and cheese, collard greens, cornbread, like a lot of those southern side dishes that you think of. Just eat that with some barbecue and have a good beer if you like beer and that kind of thing. But there's just like, just slow down and enjoy the kind of pace of life down south.
Sounds so good, especially the food. And we can go ahead and just talk about the food now, because I was going to ask you about that later on.
Yeah.
So if you want to tell us, like you've already mentioned the fixins and the barbecue, but if you want to tell us a little bit more about just those staple things that you have to try in North Carolina, that would be lovely.
Yeah. So the staple foods that I think are must tries when you go to North Carolina, barbecue, like I said, there's Eastern style and there's Western style, and you should definitely try both. I feel like if you're just coming in and you don't know what to try, maybe just go with Western style, because I think that's a little bit more like what people think of when they think of barbecue. But again, I like the vinegar-based sauce. So yeah, barbecue's great. Beer, especially if you're in Asheville, there are so many good breweries to go to. Burial Beer Company is one of the best ones that I would recommend. And this is in my guide. And they have a couple locations in Asheville. But that's one of the best breweries in the city. And then there's also actually pretty good wine in North Carolina. So this goes for like the eastern part of the state and the kind of western part of the state. I'm sure there are vineyards and wineries in the middle part of the state, but I'm specifically kind of thinking in eastern North Carolina, there is like a winery called like Duplin Winery. And I've been there and done a tasting and it was really fun, but it's a lot like there's sweeter wines and that kind of thing. I feel like they're really nice for just like hanging with the girls and having a nice glass of wine. And then in the western part of the state, there are a lot of other wineries, especially some with like really beautiful views up in the mountains. I know outside of Asheville in this town called Hendersonville, there is a winery that makes mead specifically, which is wine made from honey. And that specific winery has like beautiful mountain views. So there's actually a bit of beer and wine. You'll be eating good. Oh, fried green tomatoes. That's another good one. You probably won't be eating the healthiest, but you'll be happy. So one of the other drinks that you should have when you're in North Carolina is cheerwine. It's originally from like this kind of the center of the state, this town called Salisbury. And it's a cola, but it kind of has like a cherry flavor. So I know people who go back to North Carolina regularly, I think cheerwine's a really big thing. I'm not a big cola person, but you should try it. Also, randomly, Texas Pete is from North Carolina. Fun fact.
Who is Texas Pete? Tell us.
So Texas Pete is a hot sauce. I don't use it because I don't like spicy stuff. I have a wimp tolerance for it. But no, Texas Pete is a hot sauce and it's not from Texas. It's from North Carolina.
That's a very misleading name.
I know. Apparently the history of it was, again, don't quote me on this, but they were like, oh, like North Carolina Pete or something does not sound spicy. But Texas Pete sounds a lot spicier. I don't know.
So funny.
So,
I feel like the name Pete does not imply spiciness. So.
I don't know who Pete is. So,
but good to know it's from North Carolina. I'll have to try Texas Pete one of these days.
In case you ever come across it at the grocery store. If we're talking about other popular like foods and things, Pepsi was invented in North Carolina. Fun fact. Yeah, on the East Coast in New Bern, which is like a small town. It's not quite like on the ocean. It's a little bit more inwards, but it's on the East Coast. So that's fun. Another one of the popular foods, I'm just listing off a huge list right now.
I love it.
Krispy Kreme, the donut, also from North Carolina. The original location is in Raleigh. And I remember I went there for the first time with some of my friends from college. We took a photo out front with the sign and had some good donuts. They were great.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I didn't know that North Carolina was the birthplace of so many iconic brands like that. So very cool. Yeah, and Southern food is so good. Like you said, it's not exactly healthy, I wouldn't say, but some of the greatest inventions ever, like chicken and waffles to me is just the greatest thing ever. And there's only like one experience I've ever had in North Carolina. It was a long layover in Raleigh. I walked down the street, got the greatest chicken and waffles I've ever had in my entire life from some hole in the wall. And I wasn't expecting anything. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to come back here just for these chicken and waffles. So I want to go back just to do a food tour after you telling me about all of this. So I hope
for sure
everyone listening feels the same. Well, thank you for sharing that on food. Always an important topic to discuss, I think. It's what most people look forward to in these episodes. So you've told us about all these awesome things to do. And a lot of it is more on the western side of the state, which I know you're more versed in because that's where you were raised. But I know many people are probably quite interested in the Outer Banks, not just because of the TV show, which is my only point of reference for the Outer Banks, but the Outer Banks are on the coast. That's the beaches, the islands. If you could tell us a little bit more about that area and some things to do, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so the Outer Banks are kind of like a string of barrier islands that are, I believe, like North Carolina's the most eastern part of the state are these barrier islands. And it's made up of a bunch of different islands. There's two like main like kind of protected areas. It's Cape Hatteras and Cape Lookout. And the kind of whole thing to do there is just really enjoy the like preserved beaches. It's a much like slower pace. I know one of the islands, Ocracoke, it's like a car-free island. So you go out there and it's like you bike around or you take golf carts around and it's just really like a quiet, relaxing kind of atmosphere. And then kind of below the Outer Banks, you get into like Wilmington area. And that's, I believe, the biggest city on the East Coast of North Carolina. And it's a very like charming small city town. And nearby you can go to like Carolina Beach. And Carolina Beach has a boardwalk with lots of like family friendly things like an aquarium. So it definitely is worth experiencing. And going back to like the Outer Banks, they do have wild horses. So this is like one of the biggest attractions, or just I think people are really fascinated by this. There's a wild horse population up there that have been there for hundreds of years, or I'm not exactly sure on the date, but they've been there for a long time, and like through hurricanes coming in and just like long history taking place, like they're still there, they're still going strong, and it's just like a really cool natural attraction, natural thing to see.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for touching on all those awesome things to do. And now I want to get into where to stay, which you've also kind of brushed on earlier in the episodes. So, if you were describing like on a map, can you describe how North Carolina is laid out with the major cities and those different areas?
So if you're wondering where to stay in North Carolina, I would just kind of pick the general region of the state that you want to be in. So again, there's like the eastern part of the state with the beaches and everything, the Piedmont, which is kind of like flatlands, and that's where you'll find some of your bigger cities like Charlotte, Greensboro, Winston-Salem. Raleigh's kind of bunched into that with the Research Triangle, and that's where three like big North Carolina universities are. So like Duke, Chapel Hill, and NC State. And then the western part of the state, that's where the mountains are, the biggest area, biggest city is Asheville. So I would say if you're kind of deciding where to stay, you kind of need to pick a region. And I feel like the biggest ones are just Asheville, Charlotte, Raleigh, and like Wilmington or the Outer Banks. And so like base yourself kind of in one of those places. And then from there, there's always like plenty of day trips and things to do in those surrounding areas.
So between all of those major cities that you just mentioned, where do you think is the best one to stay for a first timer in North Carolina?
So of those destinations that I mentioned, just to kind of dive deeper into each of those places and who they're good for, I wanted to give a quick rundown of those places. So for Asheville, for instance, I think if you want to see mountains and nature and go hiking, and you want a city with a very distinct like local feel and local kind of culture and vibe, that's a good place for that, as well as just all the beer and doing like day trips to other cute small mountain towns. Asheville's perfect for that. And then Charlotte is the biggest city in the state, and that's good if you want to have, more of that city feel, but it kind of has its own like southern charm to it. Arts and entertainment are big. You can see lots of different like shows, whether that's like theater or concerts or whatever it might be, as well as like sports. So, football is really big in Charlotte. So, if you're into sports and that kind of thing, that's a good place to be. Raleigh is the capital, but it has a very like city suburban kind of atmosphere. And there's museums to visit. So like if you have younger kids, that I think there will be some good places to take them, as well as like a lot of the universities are kind of near Raleigh. So maybe if you have a kid that's scouting universities, that could be a good place to stay. Wilmington is kind of the main city on the coast. And that's a good spot if you want to go to like Carolina Beach and just kind of enjoy the more coastal scene. And then if you go a little bit north, the Outer Banks, again, barrier islands, just enjoy a really relaxing beach vacation, maybe see some wild horses. That's what that would be good for. So those would be kind of my recommendations for where to stay in North Carolina if you're like just looking at the state and you kind of don't know where to start.
Okay, awesome. So I don't really know about the economics of North Carolina, but how would you recommend someone budget a trip there? And is there a specific area that you think would be better for budget travelers as opposed to maybe the pricier areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say Asheville and Charlotte are probably the more expensive places to be in North Carolina. But in general, North Carolina is cheaper than a lot of other parts of the U.S. So I would say you can still kind of visit wherever you want to visit in the state and just simply like stay just outside the city and just be mindful of like what restaurant activities and things like that you're doing. And there's a lot that you can do in the state for free because it's just like hiking, going to the beach, like that type of thing. That's so much of what the appeal of North Carolina is. So you can do so much of that for free. You do need a car though. You need a car to get around. But just, yeah, as far as budgeting, yeah, you can eat a lot of places for cheaper and just kind of get into the small towns outside of a city, and you'll notice that things are immediately more budget friendly.
And you did just mention a car, which leads me right into my next question for you, which is what is the best way to get around North Carolina? If you could touch on public transportation systems, car rentals, whatever you think is the best way to get the most out of the state.
Yeah, so you definitely need a car to get around North Carolina. Like there's no two ways about it. You need a car. And just to reach also some of the bigger attractions, whether that's like driving the Blue Ridge Parkway or doing a road trip to different parts of the state, that would be a really fun thing to do. Years ago, I kind of did like a road trip across the state. So yeah, you need a car, rental car, if you drive into the state, whatever works for you. And then within some of the cities, public transportation is not the most widespread best thing in the state. In Charlotte, they do have a light rail that kind of connects different parts of the city. And it has a couple of different lines now. Back when I was in college, it was just like one line, but they have a couple of different lines now that can take you around the city. So there is public transportation in Charlotte, but the other cities, you're going to have like your standard city buses, but a car is the best way to get around. And then obviously within some of the cities and then the towns, they're pretty walkable.
So good to know you need a car. So keep that in mind.
Just to piggyback off of the whole car thing, I would say, depending on where you're driving in the state, just be kind of like a more mindful driver. And I only say that because, you're going to find a lot of like rural roads and you might get stuck behind a tractor. That happens. That's a thing. And so like, just be patient. And also like, if you're, again, in the mountains, there can be a lot of curvy roads. And so if you're not used to that, just go slow and just be a decent driver. But yeah, that's just something to take into consideration if you're going to visit that part of the state.
Okay. Well, when you're renting a car in North Carolina, keep in mind you might want to go for something a little sturdier than the most basic option. Good to know. All right. So if you could just quickly brush on safety in North Carolina.
Yeah. So generally speaking, North Carolina is safe. As with anywhere, you want to be more cautious if you're in the cities or if you're somewhere at night. And also just small towns are going to be safer than a bigger city, just generally. I would say, yeah, just normal safety precautions, like keep an eye on your belongings, lock your door and like your car door, and you'll be fine. There is kind of a prevalent like homeless population in Asheville and as well as some places in Charlotte that has kind of like increased over the years. So I would just say that that's something to be mindful of. So outdoor safety is something to keep in mind. So obviously, when you're over in the beaches and you've got like younger kids, just kind of keep an eye on them and just general like swim beach safety is important. If you're in the mountains, be mindful of trails and the signage. Do not be jumping off of waterfalls. People seem to sometimes think that they can do that. Accidents have happened. And so don't jump off of the waterfalls. Just be very mindful of like safety, specifically like swimming around the waterfalls and hiking around them and all of that. That's something to be a little extra cautious with. So those are the kind of safety measures or just safety things that I would keep in mind.
Okay. You guys get hurricanes, right?
Okay. So we get hurricanes, like that'll hit the eastern part of the state.
Right.
With the beach and everything. Generally, hurricanes are not going to be an issue in the western part of the state. However, a couple years ago in 2024, I'm sure viewers watching this probably know what I'm talking about, but Hurricane Helene hit Asheville really, really hard. And it was one of those like once every 100 years type of floods. And it just like devastated so many parts of Western North Carolina. So, but that's very rare that happens. Tornadoes can kind of be something to worry about in the middle of the state, but just because it is a little bit flatter. But yeah, it just kind of depends what region of the state you're in.
Okay. Good to know. And that kind of leads me into the time of year to visit. I don't know when hurricane season is exactly, but if you could just kind of touch on when is the best time to visit and maybe the seasons to avoid in North Carolina, that would be lovely.
So you can visit North Carolina throughout the year. Each season kind of has something different to offer. Fall is one of the most popular times to visit North Carolina, especially again in the western part of the state, just because the foliage is really beautiful. The mountains are just beautiful when all the leaves are turning. The summer is really fun for like when you're at the beaches, going hiking and that type of thing. The heat can be brutal in the summer, especially in the Piedmont. So that's something to keep in mind. Winter, definitely better for like budget travelers. And a lot of the times you can still kind of enjoy some of those outdoor attractions, just maybe not to their fullest. But the weather in North Carolina is generally much more mild than in other parts of the country. So in the winter, it's not going to be like freezing generally. And so you can still, enjoy like walks on the beach or, some hiking if it's not like snowing and super icy out. The spring is something to be mindful of in North Carolina just because the spring allergies are very intense. Visit during the spring, just be cautious and bring some allergy medicine because The pollen is no joke, but
Yeah.
it can be really beautiful. Flowers blooming, all that type of thing. Just depends how sensitive you are to that type of thing.
Yeah, no, that's good to know because I think people forget about allergy season and then it'll just like ruin your trip if you don't have anything to help you
For
get through it.
sure. Yeah, like in the springtime, it'll be like cars will just be covered with like a coat of
Oh my
pollen,
God,
like
really?
yellow, green,
Just
and yeah,
yellow everywhere.
literally. I
My
remember.
worst nightmare.
Oh, it's awful. I remember in college there was one day in college when I was in Charlotte where I was like, it's so nice outside. I want to work outside and study. And so like I tried to sit outside for an hour and I couldn't do it. My eyes were literally like watering from the pollen.
Crying.
I couldn't breathe. I was like, this is awful and not worth it. So
Good
just
Lord.
drink some Zyrtec or something. And yeah, just be cautious.
Yeah, no, that's very good to know. And when you talk about the mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains are the most famous and like the biggest mountain range in North Carolina. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's technically like the Appalachian Mountain Range is the mountains. Some people you could say the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains. It's kind of synonymous. The Great Smoky Mountains. It's the same mountain range.
Okay.
And yeah,
Because I've
so
heard all three of those and I thought that they were all three different.
no, for sure, it's like all the same mountain range. There are different like parks within
Yeah, makes
the
sense.
western part of the state that can kind of break it up. So, for instance, like Great Smoky Mountain National Park, one of the biggest attractions, and that's kind of headed more towards Tennessee. But yeah, it's all the same mountain range. It's a beautiful national park, very family friendly, free to access, lots of like very cool wildlife and different plants to see and different just beautiful trails and all of that. Camping.
Yeah. In the fall, it's just
Yeah,
I've seen pictures
so
of that and
cozy.
it's so gorgeous.
Yeah, fall is one of the best times to visit North Carolina. The foliage is really beautiful and the weather is crisp and perfect for hiking, and you can go apple picking and all sorts of fun classic fall activities. So that would be one of the best times to visit. It does get super, super popular and things book up quick in October. But I would say if you could visit like end of September, early November to kind of bypass some of that.
Okay, well, we're coming right to the end of the episode right now. So I just want to ask you if you have any final tips for people traveling to North Carolina, as well as just your overall pitch for why it's a great destination to visit.
So travelers should visit North Carolina for a lot of different reasons. But I would just say if you're looking for family-friendly, more affordable, or just accessible like nature attractions, this is going to be a great state for that. There are so many beautiful, charming small towns, whether that's in the mountains or over on the coast, and you're going to have really great food around the state.
Absolutely. Do you have any final tips before we go?
For tips for visiting North Carolina, I would just say make the small talk. Strangers are friendly and generally just open to yapping. So
Perfect for us.
Exactly. So make the small talk at like the grocery store or the restaurant or whatever and just be friendly and enjoy a slower pace. Also, a lot of people in North Carolina do have accents. North Carolina is part of the South, even though some people like to somehow debate me on that fact because there's North in the title. It is definitely a part of the South. And a lot of people do have accents. The very last tip I have would be just in some of the smaller towns, don't expect everything to be open late. Things will literally close at like 3 p.m. or 5 p.m. So just be mindful of that. If you're like, oh, I want to go shopping after work or something, a lot of things might be closed. So it's a lot of that like small town life and, in slower small town pace. So just kind of expect that when you go.
Okay, well, all great things to know. Thank you so much for telling us all about North Carolina today. And that is all for this episode. So listeners, again, visit travellemming.com and type in North Carolina in the search bar to read all of Lea Rose's guides. She also has awesome articles on multiple different locations like Chicago and Italy and more. But for this episode, we'll have all of the North Carolina articles that she's written in the show notes. Again, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star rating. We really, really do appreciate your support there. Check out our homepage on travellemming.com to see if we're hosting a meetup in a city near you. If you're in Chicago, you can meet Lea Rose in the flesh and ask her all sorts of travel questions and meet some really cool people while you're at it. Lea Rose, thank you again so much for being here for our North Carolina episode. It was so fun talking about it. It was great to hear about where you grew up, and now I really can't wait to plan a trip to the South. And I hope that listeners feel the same.
Amazing. Well, I have all the recommendations for you, so just head to Travel Lemming and read those articles.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Until next time on the Travel Lemming podcast.